Welcome to G3 TV, where African stories come to life. In the quiet outskirts of Naija, a village folded into the clay-brown hills of Anambra State, lived a woman named Amoka. Her name, meaning beautiful, was the only thing anyone agreed had been given to her freely by the world. Everything else she possessed, she had fought for, scraped for, in some cases with bare fingers and blistered palms. She was not born into wealth, nor into the kind of poverty that draws pity from strangers. Her life had always hovered in that thin space between survival and collapse. Amoka's late father, Izenwa, had been a palm wine tapper, known more for his cheerful drunkenness than his business acumen. Her mother, Omalika, sold smoked fish at the Nko market and carried herself with the elegance of a woman who once believed in love. They had 3 children. 2 died before the age of 5. Amoka remained. It was said that when her younger brother passed, Omalika stared at the boy's body for hours without weeping and then turned to Amoka and whispered, "The earth must have chosen you." No one ever told Amoka what that meant. By the time she turned 20, she was the one supplying fish to her mother's old customers. She had learned to mend her nets with steady fingers and a mouthful of pins. She walked the long road to the river before dawn, alone, carrying her baskets. Her skin darkened with sun and hard work. Her beauty, once whispered about by teenage boys and proud aunties alike, grew quieter, more severe. People still noticed her face, but they now said, "She is fine, but life has pressed her." And life had. She lived in a one-room house that let in more air than it kept out. The zinc roof whined each time the wind came. Her clothes were clean but few. She had no jewelry, no phone of her own, no plans for Onitsha or Enugu. Yet when she smiled, and she did, often, it was the kind of smile that made people pause, unsure whether to feel shame or gratitude. It was the smile of someone who had no illusions left to lose. So, when the news came that Chief Aneo was looking for a wife, the village buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Chief was old, yes, and his wealth had the smell of blood and politics, yes. But he was also generous, at least in front of witnesses, and his last wife had died without children. That meant the next woman he married stood to inherit land, buildings, connections, everything. Amoka, her neighbor, had said one morning, dropping her voice like a stone into a still pool, "You should let someone mention your name to the chief." Amoka looked up from her fish smoking stand, her hands blackened from the heat. "Why?" "Because you deserve more than this," the woman said, gesturing vaguely at the smoke and cracked ground. "The man is looking. And you are fine. Intelligent too." Amoka did not reply. She simply turned the fish over with her stick. The flames crackled. Within a week, the chief's messenger came. He arrived on a motorcycle with shiny chrome handles, wearing sandals that looked too soft for the road. He introduced himself as Silas and said the chief had heard of her, her beauty, her diligence, her strength. "And what did he say he wanted?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "A wife? Not just a companion. A woman who can sit beside him at community meetings, manage his household, carry his name with pride." "And what must I do in return?" Silas smiled, the kind of smile that believed in its own charm. "Be yourself. Just finer." She laughed at that, a short, dry sound. "I see." He watched her with a curiosity that felt more like evaluation. "He can send a car for you. You don't need to decide today. Just visit him. Eat. Talk." Amoka agreed to go, not because she was tempted, but because curiosity is its own hunger. That Sunday, a Toyota Prado came for her. The driver opened the door like she was royalty. She wore the best wrapper she owned, a red one with golden peacocks, and borrowed a blouse from her cousin. Her hair was woven freshly, her lips oiled. Chief Aneo's mansion sat on the hill overlooking Tage like a king over his court. The compound had marble tiles, a deep boho, and a servant who greeted her with bowing eyes. The chief himself was waiting inside, dressed in white lace and red coral beads. His voice was deep, his laughter louder than necessary. "You are more than they described," he said as she entered. She said nothing. She was not easily charmed. They spoke over jollof rice and grilled tilapia. He asked her about her family, her business, her plans. She answered plainly. When he asked her what she wanted most in life, she paused. "Peace," she said. "Peace and truth." The chief smiled, but something in his eyes dimmed. "And if peace comes in a mansion, with servants and cars, then let it be true peace," she replied. "Not something that silences your soul just so the neighbors can hear your laughter." That was the moment he knew she would be difficult, and perhaps, for that reason, even more desirable. He sent more gifts after that day. Bags of rice. An envelope of money. A new wrapper with lace so fine it looked like it could vanish. She accepted none of them. The village whispered again, louder now. Girls who had once smiled at her began to hiss when she passed. Old women watched her like they were counting the days she would fall into the trap. But Amoka remained unmoved. One evening, she sat beside her oil lamp, writing accounts in her ledger, when her cousin barged in. "Sister, what is wrong with you?" she asked, panting. Amoka looked up slowly. "What is it? Are you mad? The chief is offering you life. You're saying no because of what? Your pride? Your little fish business?" Amoka closed the ledger. Her voice was calm. "It's not pride. It's clarity. Clarity will not feed you. But it will keep me whole." Her cousin stared at her like she was watching something sacred destroy itself. "You don't know what you're giving up." "I do," Amoka said. "And I also know what I'm keeping." By the next market day, Chief Aneo had proposed to another woman. A girl from Nando. Younger. Quieter. Willing. The village let out a collective breath and then turned their judgment on Amoka. They said she had been proud. Foolish. That poverty had eaten her brain. That no man would ever look at her again. Amoka continued to fish, to smoke, to sell. Her business did not flourish, but it did not die. The same could be said of her hope. Some days were bitter. Others held small joys, when the smoke called just right, or when a customer returned to say her fish tasted like home. These moments were not riches. But they were real. Years passed. One morning, as she stood by the river pulling in her net, a young girl ran to her. "Is it true you turned down the chief?" the child asked breathlessly. Amoka looked at her, surprised. "Who told you that?" "My mother. She said you could have been rich but you chose to stay. And what do you think?" The girl looked at the water. "I think you are strong. I think you're not afraid." Amoka smiled. "I am afraid sometimes. But I'm more afraid of becoming someone I don't know." The child nodded like she understood, though she could not. That night, Amoka slept well. The wind sang against the zinc roof, and for once, the world outside felt no heavier than the breath in her chest. The seasons changed quietly in Tage, the way a hand turns a page in an old book. The people shifted with it, planting, harvesting, marrying, burying, and yet Amoka's story never quite faded from their mouths. It became one of those tales that clung to corners of conversations, whispered beside cooking fires, murmured after Sunday service. Not because it had ended in scandal or tragedy, but because no one could understand it. A woman who said no to riches and was still alive. To many, she became a kind of warning. To a few, she became a quiet legend. One rainy afternoon, As thunder roared over the hills and rain slapped the tin roofs like open palms, Amoka sat under her licking canopy, selling fish to a woman who worked in the health center. The woman, tall and full-chested, spoke with a sharp tongue. "You know, if you had said yes to the chief, you'd be in Dubai by now." Amoka smiled faintly. "And if I had said yes to every chance that knocked, I would be in a grave." The woman clicked her tongue and laughed, more out of discomfort than humor. She left with her fish, and Amoka sat for a long while, watching the water pool around her feet, remembering a day when her roof did not leak but her heart did. There had been nights she nearly gave in. Nights when she lay curled on her mat with a belly half full and the sound of laughter from other compounds stinging her ears. She had dreamt of what it might be like to wake in a mansion, to wear slippers that didn't need mending, to hear people call her madam. But every time the dream came close to becoming a desire, she remembered her mother's voice before she died. Money is not peace. Money is not sleep. Money is not love. If it costs those things, it's not wealth. It's a debt you will pay in silence. Amoko's father had died drunk, her brother of fever, and her mother of a broken heart. She had inherited nothing but truth, and though truth didn't buy meat in the market, it bought her rest at night. It was during one such restless night that her story began to turn, though she didn't know it yet. A stranger arrived in Tej. He was not the kind of man that usually turned heads. His clothes were clean but plain. His shoes had worked places. His face was calm, lined in a way that told of years lived quietly, perhaps painfully. He rented a small room at the edge of the village and introduced himself simply as Chisholm. He didn't say where he came from, but people assumed he was from somewhere past Oka or maybe even farther, one of those places where people don't talk too much about their past. He came to Amoko's stall on his second morning in the village. "I heard you sell the best fish," he said. "I sell what I catch," she replied without looking up. He chuckled. "That's probably why it's the best." She glanced at him then, and saw that his smile wasn't the kind that reached for attention. It was quiet, like a nod between old friends. She handed him 2 pieces, wrapped in brown paper. "You'll come again," she said. "I think I will," he replied, and he did. Chisholm returned the next day, and the one after that. Sometimes he bought fish, sometimes just ground nuts or pepper from the next stall, but he always passed by hers. He did not ask questions, and she did not offer stories. It was the kind of silence that sat comfortably between them, like a shared mat during Harmattan. After 2 weeks, he spoke. "You don't remember me, do you?" She looked at him, truly looked this time. "Should I?" He nodded once. "We were children. I used to fetch water from the same stream where your mother washed clothes." She stared at him. Something in his eyes stirred memory, not a face, but a feeling. Safety. She said nothing, but from that day, her heart beat differently when he came. Chisholm did not speak of wealth. He did not drive a car. He walked or rode with the bicycle he bought from the vulcanizer. He helped old men fix their fences, joined the youth in repairing the church roof, and sat with the children after evening prayers to tell them riddles. He did not chase admiration, yet it followed him quietly, like mist on water. One morning, he came with a question. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" She frowned slightly. "Where?" "Nowhere special. Just there," he said, pointing toward the footpath behind the primary school. She agreed, though she didn't know why. They walked in silence at first, past the sleepy houses and the bushes singing with insects. At some point, she asked, "Why did you come back to this place?" "I needed to find something I lost." "And did you?" "I think I'm looking at it." She didn't reply. But something in her chest shifted. In the weeks that followed, Their walks became regular. He never rushed, never pressed. And for the first time in years, Amoka found herself speaking freely. She told him about her parents, about the chief, about the fish that refused to smoke well during the wet season. He listened, not to reply, but to understand. Then one day, without fanfare or ceremony, he said it. "I would like to build a life with you." She laughed. It wasn't mocking, it was gentle, amazed. "With what will we build?" "Your bicycle." "My burnt fish." "With truth," he said. "With kindness. With whatever our hands can make. I am not rich. But I am not afraid of poverty, if you're in it with me." She did not answer right away. But her silence was no longer the silence of doubt. It was the silence of a heart remembering how to say yes without saying anything. By the time the rain softened and the sky returned to its dry clarity, Amoka and Chisholm had moved in together. They did not marry in a hall or with loud music. The pastor blessed them under the open sky, and they danced in bare feet on packed earth. The villagers watched, some with pity, others with envy, though none would admit it. They were not wealthy. Their home was simple. But laughter lived there. And peace. And when they argued, as all people do, they argued without venom, because they had chosen each other with eyes open. Years passed. Children came, 2 daughters, then a son. Amoka taught them how to mend nets, how to clean fish, how to carry themselves with dignity. Chisholm taught them how to build, to read, to pray without begging. They were not the richest family in Tage, but they were the most rooted. And when people told her she had thrown away her chance at a better life, she would smile, sometimes sadly, sometimes proudly, and say, "No. I chose my life. And it chose me back." The day her daughter turned 15, Amoka sat outside with Chisholm, watching the evening slip into darkness. Smoke from cooking fires curled into the air. Children ran barefoot past their gate, shouting about moonlight games. Chisholm was whittling a small piece of wood into a spoon, and Amoka, shelling groundnuts into a bowl, looked at him with quiet wonder. There was no music playing. No generator humming. Just the sound of breath and years well spent. "I thought of you yesterday," she said softly. "Which version of me?" "The man with fish money and a bicycle." He chuckled. "That poor man. The richest man I've known." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that holds hands with memory. Their daughter, Edeora, had asked earlier that week why they didn't live like Chief Namdi's family in the next town. Why they didn't drive cars or have a refrigerator. Amoka had knelt and looked her child in the eye. "We have enough," she said. And enough is a treasure most people spend their whole lives chasing. She didn't say more. Children, after all, only understand what their hearts are ready to hold. But that night, Edeora laid her head on her mother's lap and said nothing more about fridges. Still, the world outside their home moved forward with its noise and wants. A cousin came from Lagos to boast about real estate and contact and parties where people sprayed money like confetti. He visited Amoka and spoke at length, barely pausing to breathe. "You chose struggle," he said, not unkindly. "But it's not too late. I can introduce your son to someone. He can start small. These days, small is all it takes to become big." Chisholm looked at him, then turned to Amoka. "What do you think?" She was quiet. Then she stood, wiped her hands on her wrapper, and said, "If small leads him to truth, let him go. But if it leads him to lose his name, his peace, or his sleep, then may he remain small forever." Her cousin laughed, confused. "You still talk in riddles, Amoka?" "No," she said. The world just stopped listening. As time folded into itself and age crept into their bones, Amoka began to notice the village looking at her differently. Not with scorn. Not with envy. But with a kind of quiet respect that is only given to those who stay standing when the world has finished shaking. She became a woman people came to for counsel, not because she was loud, but because her silence made sense. Once, a young girl from the church came crying into her home, saying her boyfriend from Enugu had promised her a life, and now he had disappeared with her hope. Amoka didn't offer her a Bible verse or a proverb. She simply cooked yam and stew, set it before the girl, and said, "Eat. You're still breathing. That's enough for now." The girl cried more, but she ate. And years later, when she married a mechanic who danced like water and made her laugh until her stomach ached, she sent Amoka a letter that said, "You gave me food when I only wanted pity. Thank you." And so it went. Amoka did not become rich. Her name was never printed in a newspaper. She died in her sleep one August morning, wrapped in a faded wrapper, her husband's hand resting gently over hers. The children found her before the sun had fully risen, her face soft, peaceful. The news spread through Ntage slowly, like a breeze through cassava fields. Women came, weeping. Men stood in silence. Children asked why the woman who always smiled was sleeping too long. They buried her beside the little house she had shared with Chisholm, beneath the open sky. There was no choir. No banners. But there were testimonies, simple stories from mouths who remembered the small things she did with quiet kindness. A fish given without price. A pot of soup delivered during illness. A smile that made shame feel like a thing that could pass. And in the weeks that followed, as her family continued their lives, plaiting hair, fixing roofs, planting maize, a new kind of wealth grew in their home. People still came, not for loans or opportunities, but to sit. To remember. To learn how a woman who had nothing in her hands had left so much in their hearts. Years later, when her grandchildren asked, "Why did Grandma live so simply?" Chisholm would answer, "Because she knew something most people forget." What did she know? That happiness is not in what you have, but in what you don't lose trying to get more. In the end, the woman who chose poverty over riches was never truly poor. She had love. She had peace. She had a name that could not be bought, could not be sold, and will not be forgotten. And that, in any village, in any age, is the richest life a person can live.